A viewer found a hidden journal while cleaning out his late father's office, and what it claimed about mermaids and secret shipping routes and powerful people in the world is almost impossible to believe. Now, this story was sent to me by a viewer who had asked me to not use his name, and honestly, I don't know what to make of it. Obviously, I cannot prove any of it, so this is for entertainment purposes only. Now, according to him, his father passed away earlier this year, and the funeral had came and went. Family visited from out of town, and eventually everyone started the difficult process of sorting through his belongings. Now, his father had always been a mysterious man. He wasn't cold, wasn't distant. He said he was a very loving father, but he was just very, very private and the kind of person who never talked much about work or what he did to make a living. And whenever anyone had brought up the topic, he would, what he did for a living, he'd just smile and be like, "Oh, I do shipping and logistics." Right? Like really like short. And that was pretty much it, right? No further details, no stories, nothing. But the strange thing was that despite how little he talked about it and about work and everything, the family always lived extremely comfortably, right? They had a beautiful home. Actually, they had two. The kids went to private schools, vacations. I mean, they were not hurting for anything, right? And his father somehow knew people who seemed incredibly important in the world: politicians, foreign businessmen, government officials. The viewer told me that as a kid, he'd often see expensive, blacked out government style vehicles pull into the driveway late at night, and men in suits would come into his house and go into his father's office. Conversations would happen behind closed doors, and then everyone would leave again. And it was pretty normal, he said, and nobody really ever explained anything. Now, a few weeks after the funeral, the viewer was helping clean out his father's home and the office. And behind an old bookshelf they planned on removing, they found a small hidden like a compartment that was built into the wall, and inside was a black journal. And there was no title on it, no date, no markings really, just hundreds of handwritten pages. And at first, they assumed it was, his father's diary. His father was in the military and everything, and so they just started casually reading it. And the earliest entries talked about how his father's career started, and he described working for a private merchant company that specialized in transporting sensitive cargo all around the world. And the journal had claimed that he signed multiple non-disclosure agreements, and he was forbidden from ever discussing the nature of his work with anybody, not even his family. And he kept that promise, obviously, until the day that he passed. The entries were surprisingly detailed: dates, locations, shipping routes, private islands, military ports, research facilities, you name it, his father was there and did it. But the one thing that kept appearing throughout the journal, something that his father referred to only as the specimens. And the viewer assumed it was code for, he thought it was maybe like exotic animals or some type of material, until he reached an entry dated nearly 20 years ago. And according to his father, a shipping container had arrived at a secure port facility under armed guard. The cargo container was unlike anything that his father had ever seen before at this time, and it contained its own like a filtration system, he said. There were temperature controls, saltwater circulation pumps, and thick reinforced viewing glass. And his father wrote that, curiosity, of course, got the better of him, as I feel like it would with everybody. And he looked inside, and immediately he wished that he hadn't, is what he stated in the journal, because it described a pale figure submerged in dark water, something with human like eyes and human like hands, long black hair that was drifting all throughout the tank. He said it was the longest hair and thickest that he had ever seen. But below its waist, there were, of course, no legs, only a massive scaled like tail. And the entry specified that his father was told to never refer to them as mermaids. But the viewer told me the deeper that he went, the stranger the journal then became. And his father claimed that these creatures were transported all over the world for a small group of extremely influential clients, people that were connected to governments and royal families, private research organizations. And the journal never named any of them, right? I would think that the dad was journaling to, maybe cope with everything, right? It was his own sense of therapy. I don't know. But his father only referred to these groups of people as the inner core. And according to one entry, the creatures weren't considered myths. They, within certain circles of power, they were actually considered assets, property, and something to be collected, studied, moved, protected, and occasionally traded. But the part that disturbed the viewer the most wasn't the creatures themselves, really. It was how afraid his father seemed about it. And as the years went on, the entries became increasingly paranoid. His handwriting began to change over time. Sentences became extremely shorter. They were messier. He wasn't really explaining that much. And one page talked about how they're all not monsters, talking about these creatures, with no explanation, just that. Several pages later, another entry stated how he spent 20 years moving them from place to place. And the things, guarding them are far worse than what they are. I don't know what that's about, but the viewer said he got chills reading it because his father never elaborated further on that, never explained what he meant or who he was talking about. And then he reached the final pages and entries written only months before his father had passed away. And his dad claimed that he believed that someone had discovered that he was maybe keeping records of this, this journal. And he wrote that vehicles were occasionally positioned outside of his house late at night, that unfamiliar men had started appearing in places that he frequented. And he felt like he was being watched all the time, and his family, and everything that they told the public was intentional. These creatures were never discovered, they're not real, they were hidden. And the journal ended right there. There was no further explanation, no names, nothing. And the viewer said he would have dismissed the entire thing as fiction, except for one detail. At his father's funeral, several men had appeared that he had never seen before, and they stood silently at the back of the service, and they wore dark suits. They spoke to nobody, they kept to themselves, and they stayed until the burial, and then they looked at each other and they left. When he had later asked his mom, who they were, she simply said that she didn't know. And, according to her, they'd been appearing around his father for as long as she could remember. So the father was obviously venting to the mother about this. Now, obviously, there's no way to verify any of this. Like I said earlier, for all we know, this journal could have been a creative writing project, a fantasy story, or the imagination of a man who lived a secret life. We really don't know. But if it wasn't, then maybe the biggest mystery isn't whether mermaids exist or not. Maybe it's why someone spent decades making sure that nobody ever found out about them. Let me know.